Day 149. The next morning, while in Major Stillman's office briefing the Major on his visit to Bailey Bezio's house, Carl paused as Lieutenant Saunders knocked on the door. He informed the two men that they had identified the men who were in the truck that attacked the trading post 2 days before. The man in the back who threw the Molotov cocktail was, in fact, 22-year-old Jackson Bezio, Bailey's oldest son. The other man in the back of the truck was Butch Wells, 31. He was an area contractor before the EMP attack. He had a wife and no children. In the front was the driver, Ben Roberts, and his brother Teddy, ages 31 and 33 respectively. They were employed as steel workers before the attack. Carl told Major Stillman that he knew each of the men. He didn't believe any of them to be capable of masterminding the attack or organizing the group. No, he inferred, there must be others involved. This troubled Major Stillman, who instructed Carl to keep investigating and to keep him informed of any developments. At the same time, the train was up from the city and getting ready to make the trip back. In the large bag of messenger correspondence was a letter for a man named Buddy Tanner. It was sent to the clerk's office at the headquarters of the River Valley Railroad. There it would be intercepted by a young dock worker for the railroad, a member of the same MC that Roger belonged to. Buddy Tanner, the MC president, received the letter from him. It simply said, "Contact made. Send initial package." It was signed R. Buddy smiled and said, "That didn't take long." Back at the church, Callie announced she was leaving. The death of Aaron had devastated her. Her mom and dad, as well as two of her three brothers and their families, had moved into the mountains in southern Missouri. Before the EMP attack, her brothers and their wives and young children had started an off-grid homesteading community there. They had wells drilled and solar and small hydroelectric generation systems in place. They raised livestock and had extensive gardens. They were completely self-sufficient when the EMP went off. Since then, Callie's parents have joined them there as well. Carl Fairley had helped her negotiate the assistance of Major Stillman to help secure Callie and her two small children transportation to the Ozarks. Train service was starting to emerge all over the country, and the military was running security for almost all of it. The Major was confident he could secure a spot for Callie and the kids out to the Ozarks. She knew once in town she could establish connection with her family there. Major Stillman was finalizing preparations and assured her it would be set in a few weeks. With order somewhat restored in the area, we have suspended daily patrols from the church. We knew who was left around us, and we had made a few new allies. The farmer who had come to our aid on the road the day Jerry was killed was thriving. He shared fresh eggs and meats with us regularly, and we would send a patrol over every other day or so to make sure they were safe and to help them do jobs on his homestead that required more manpower. The two couples that lived there visited the church frequently to join us for dinners or Sunday morning worship service. Pastor had always invited everyone to come join us in worship. Lieutenant Saunders politely declined numerous invitations. Major Stillman attended when his schedule allowed. Darrell and his sons also came regularly, mainly to bring Miss Mary Paulson, who Darrell knew really cherished her time in the church. They usually made the long journey every week. Now that we weren't doing daily patrols, we concentrated on fortifying our perimeter. Pastor insisted on removing the barricades from the bottom of the driveway to allow people to enter for service on Sunday. Greg urged him to replace the barrier afterwards and just move it on Sunday mornings. Pastor explained in one of our meetings that we were still a church that our duty to reach people for Christ was not suspended with the EMP attack. That now that we were holding a regular service schedule, he wanted people to be able to come whenever they wanted or needed to. He started holding regular office hours as well. Greg was placed in charge of camp security. He was a combat vet from Vietnam and seemed the obvious choice for this position. Pastor explained to Greg that he wanted the driveway cleared and looking inviting to visitors. The rest of the property would be set up at Greg's discretion. Pastor reminded Greg again that we were a church and could he please try not to make it look like a military encampment. Greg chuckled a little and said, "So you want security, but in a way nobody can see it?" Pastor smiled and said, "That's perfect. Exactly, Greg. Can we do that?" Greg just looked at Pastor as serious as a heart attack and wryly said, No, we can't." Pastor frowned and said, "Give it your best try, Greg, please." Greg had his own approach and ideas. He wasn't just going to be a yes man going along with the ebb and flow. No, he would most times end up swimming against the current. That was the proof that Pastor had selected the right man for this job. Ultimately, Pastor knew that in Greg's hands, the security of the camp would be the best we could have. Greg got to work right away developing a plan and putting protocols in place for security. With the return of a form of normalcy, a new normal, as Major Stillman had called it, Pastor fell into a state of false security in a sense. He had stopped carrying my pistol grip 12 gauge with him everywhere. He became complacent. Things outside were seemingly slowly getting better, but just days ago the camp was attacked by armed men and nearly overrun. This was not a time to be letting our guards down. This troubled Greg. He sat in the pavilion surveying the property. He was determined not to let this happen. He went into the basement and shut the door to the tool room. The tool room was being used as a communications hub. We had all our radio gear and battery banks and charge controllers for the solar in there as well. Greg had cleared off a section of the workbench and had taken it for a desk. This was now his office. He sat down and got to work on his plan. In town, Carl Fairley continued his investigation into the group that attacked the board meeting the other day. With all 5 attackers who were on scene now dead, it was difficult to make progress. He was trying to run information about the truck in an attempt to figure out where it came from and hopefully, ultimately, who it belonged to. He was interrupted when a fight broke out between 2 railroad workers in the street. He ran out and intervened, easily breaking up the fight. He noticed an odor of alcohol in the men. He knew it was against town ordinances and railroad policy to possess or consume alcohol for other than medicinal purposes. Now, Carl wasn't a drinker. He had developed a problem with it during his time in the service and gave it up completely when he married Abigail. He was determined to raise his children in an environment free of alcohol and drugs. He told his kids numerous times, "If you want to be under the influence, try being under the influence of the Holy Spirit. The high is much better, and there's no hangover the next day." Conversely, Carl was the least judgmental man you could ever meet. He believed in individual liberty and the right of all men to make their own choices regarding such things. If you wanted to drink, that was your choice. He didn't agree with it. He didn't like it. But if you chose to do it and accepted the consequences for it, so be it. It was out of his hands. He knew there were men serving illegal alcohol somewhere in town. Right now he had more pressing matters to deal with. The 2 men had visited the illegal bar down behind the metal fabricator shop during their lunch break. They stayed too long and drank too much. They didn't return to work, instead ended up in the street fighting one another. One of the men had wanted to return to work so as not to get in trouble, and the other wanted to stay and continue to drink. When the tensions escalated, the bartender had them removed to the street, where they continued their disagreement until Carl intervened. Across the street, unloading tools and supplies from the train, Roger watched the incident. Just before dinner that evening at the church, Greg called a meeting and addressed the group. He went over the need for us to remain vigilant. He reinforced the notion that we were not out of danger, that even though it seemed order was being slowly restored, and it certainly was, we still needed to be on guard. In some ways, now more than ever before. More people would be coming to town on the railroad. More roaming bands of desperate marauders were still out there as well. He pointed out that the men who attacked us just 2 days ago were most likely not the last of their kind around. He painted a pretty grim picture. In a time when all were filled with hope, he came over and stuck a pin in our collective balloons. He was right, though. We could not allow ourselves to be lulled into a false sense of security. He had spoken to Jillian about her dad's security as well. He more than anyone would need to leave camp for church and board business. She relinquished her Ruger PC-9 with the green laser sight to Greg. He gave it to Richie at the meeting. He said, "First thing tomorrow, Richie will go over the proper usage and safe operation of this weapon with you, Pastor. It's small enough to keep in your pocket, and the laser sight turns on automatically when you clear it from your holster." He looked Pastor directly in the eye and said authoritatively, "You must carry it at all times, Pastor." Pastor agreed. He proceeded to say that Dalton would be assigned as a personal security to Pastor. He would accompany him every time he left the compound. If for some reason he could not, someone else would be assigned to take his place. Again, looking directly at Pastor, he said, "Under no circumstances do you travel alone." Dalton had no military or combat experience. He was chosen because he was smart and resourceful. He had lived on the streets and had an intuition about him that was unique. He was loyal to Pastor and had no wife or children. He was the perfect person for this job, as the time requirement could be extensive at times. Then he looked over the crowd and said, "Everyone should travel in groups, or at the very least pairs when off the property. I'm also currently working the details up on a plan for inside the camp security. Every man will be assigned a station on a rotation. The tower will be manned at all time. The women who oversee the nursery and the children's playgroups will also be armed when doing so. The women on duty will be issued handguns, and a shotgun and a semi-automatic rifle will be made readily available in those areas as well." Richie has been tasked with making sure each of the women who serve in the various children ministries are trained and proficient in the use and operation of these weapons. If we issue a lockdown, you'll hear 3 short, loud pounds on the bell in the tower. At this occurrence, all men off duty will man their backup posts, and all women will proceed with the children into the pavilion basement and barricade the doors. The walls around the entire basement are concrete, and this area should be almost impenetrable. Lee and Linda will sit at each side of the door inside, armed with shotguns. The rest of the details are still being worked out and will be forthcoming, he explained. Then he said, "That's all for now. You're all dismissed." Pastor prayed for the food, and we all sat around the long tables and ate and fellowshipped with each other. Later we went up to the pavilion and started a roaring fire in the fireplace. The children were put to bed, and the group sat and drank coffee or tea, and we thanked God for all he had given us. We knew he would always provide, and today I was thankful that he provided Greg. In him was a man with the knowledge and the experience to put together this comprehensive security plan. I, for one, was grateful, again, that he was with us.